My name is Colonel Pat Greer. I am 47 years old. I have been a signals intelligence officer for 22 years, and on a Tuesday morning in September, I arrived at Weston Forward Operating Base for what was recorded on the inspection schedule as a routine capability review, and was not, in any meaningful sense, routine. I had requested the inspection. I had requested it because 6 months earlier, in April, a report had come across my desk that had stopped me, not because it was alarming, it was not alarming, because it was good, genuinely, unexpectedly good, the kind of intelligence product that makes you sit up and read it twice, and then read it a third time because you want to understand how it was produced and what collection capability was behind it, because a product that good does not come from routine work, and you want to know what is producing it.
The report had been attributed to Weston. The specific collection capability behind it had not been detailed in the attribution, which was standard. Operational security around collection methods is tightly managed. But I had experience in this domain, and I had read the product carefully, and I had formed a view about what kind of capability must be behind it, and that view had led me to a conclusion I had not been able to verify through any official channel, that Weston was running something I had not authorized. I had not been able to verify it because there was no formal record of it to verify, which told me something in itself. I had put in the inspection request in May. The inspection had been scheduled for September. I had spent the intervening 4 months watching the products that came through Weston and growing more confident in my assessment. The products were consistently excellent, the capability was real, and it had not been authorized. I arrived at Weston on a Tuesday morning in September with Captain Bex Burrell as my aide and an inspection schedule that covered every named facility on the base. Every facility except Building 7, which was not on the schedule because it was not on the base's official capability register.
Let me tell you about the tour, because the tour is where this story begins to take shape. Colonel Nick Lang had been commanding Weston for 3 years. He was 51 years old, experienced, well-regarded, the kind of commanding officer who runs a tight facility with a light touch, who understands that the people who work for him are good at what they do, and does not interfere with their work unless the work requires direction. He had a detailed itinerary, he had briefing documents, he had arranged for department heads to be available throughout the day to address any questions I had. The tour began at 0900. We covered the operations room first, 16 stations, all active, the particular focused quiet of a working intelligence environment where people are concentrating on things I am not going to describe here. I asked questions. Lang answered them. The department head added detail. The work was good. I could see it was good, from the way it was organized and the way the staff moved within it. We covered the communication center, the equipment bays, the logistics facility, the secure storage, the medical point, the accommodation blocks, which Lang showed me with the particular mild apology that commanding officers always make about the accommodation at forward bases, as if the standard of the beds is something they feel personally responsible for. At 12:45 we broke for lunch. At 1400 we resumed. The afternoon covered the training facility, the vehicle pool, the perimeter security infrastructure. Lang was informative and patient and answered every question I asked without hesitation. At 6:30, he concluded the tour with a summary briefing in his office. At no point during the 9 hours of the inspection had he mentioned Building 7. I had not asked. I had been watching him not mention it with the attention of a person who understands that what is omitted from a conversation is often more significant than what is included. He had not looked at Building 7 when we passed it. He had not looked away from it. He had simply navigated the day in such a way that it never came up. The way you navigate around an obstacle that you have learned to walk around so automatically that you no longer think about the walking around. I thanked him for the thorough briefing. I told Captain Burrell I would not need her for the rest of the evening, and I sat in the guest accommodation and I went back through the day in my memory and I counted the number of times our route had taken us close to Building 7 and the number of times Lang had found a reason to turn in the other direction. 4 times. I wrote that down. Building 7. Let me tell you what it looked like from the outside, because I had walked past it 4 times during the tour and had observed it carefully each time without appearing to observe it. It was a standard forward base structure, prefabricated, single-story, the kind of building that is functional rather than permanent. It was in good repair. The signage on the exterior was minimal, a unit designation number, the standard restricted access indicators, nothing that identified its purpose. There were no unusual activity around it. It looked, from the outside, like any of the other buildings at Weston, except that it had not been included in the tour, except that it was not on the official capability register, except that I had a strong hypothesis about what was inside it. I sat in the guest accommodation and I read the April report again. I had brought a copy. I read it very carefully, the way I had read it in April, looking at the specifics of the intelligence product, the particular fingerprint of the collection, the things that the product told me about the capability that had produced it. I had done this analysis in April, and I had reached a hypothesis. I had been refining that hypothesis through 4 months of subsequent products. By September, I was not calling it a hypothesis anymore. I was calling it a conclusion. Building 7 contained a signals collection capability that was producing some of the best intelligence products I had received in 3 years in my current role. Building 7 had not been authorized. The second morning. I met Lang at 800 for what the schedule described as a follow-up questions session. We sat in his office. He had coffee ready, he was professional and warm, and slightly more watchful than he had been the previous day, in the particular way that people are when they have spent the night wondering whether the question they had been waiting for was going to arrive. I let him settle. I asked 3 routine questions about the operations room that I had left from the previous day. He answered them carefully. Then I said, "Colonel Lang, I'd like to see Building 7. He was quiet for a moment. Not a long moment, long enough. Then he said, "Of course." He said it without additional qualification, without explanation, without anything that acknowledged that Building 7 had not been on yesterday's schedule. He simply said, "Of course," and stood up. We walked to Building 7 together. The morning was cold and clear. Neither of us spoke on the walk. There was nothing to say that was better said outside. What was inside Building 7? It was what I had concluded it was, a signals collection facility. 8 workstations, 3 analysts on duty when we entered, including Sergeant Liz Poole, who had been running the facility for the 8 months since it was established. She stood when we entered, recognized my rank, and looked at Lang with the particular expression of someone who has been anticipating this moment and has decided to face it with composure. Lang introduced me. He said, "Sergeant Poole runs our advanced collection capability. She has been managing it since we established it last January." He said it in the tone of someone who has decided to present what he has done rather than apologize for it. I looked at the workstations. I looked at the product summaries on the screens. I looked at the collection parameters that Poole showed me on request. I stood in Building 7 for approximately 40 minutes. I asked questions and received accurate, detailed, professional answers. And at the end of the 40 minutes, I thanked Poole and I asked Lang to walk with me back to his office. I want to pause here, because standing in Building 7 at Weston Forward Operating Base and understanding that what I had been reading in intelligence products for 6 months had been produced by 8 workstations and 3 analysts in an unauthorized facility that the commanding officer had been carefully not mentioning, is the moment this story became something more than an inspection.
I had the authority to authorize this capability. I had the clearance. I had, based on 4 months of reviewing the products, a genuine assessment that the capability was operationally valuable and should continue. And I had not been asked. I had not been asked because at the time Lang had made the decision to establish the capability. I had not yet been promoted to the role that gave me that authority. He had built it without a clear authorization pathway because the window had been closing and the approval process would have taken months. He had been right about the intelligence value. He had not sought authorization. If you have ever stood in front of something that was exactly what it needed to be and exactly what it was not supposed to be, drop a comment below. And subscribe right now, because what I said to Colonel Nick Lang in his office that morning and what I decided about Building 7 is the part that I have spent a great deal of time thinking about since September.
The conversation. We sat down in his office. He did not offer coffee this time. Neither of us wanted it. I said, "Tell me when you started it and why." He told me. January of the previous year, he had identified a collection gap, a category of signals traffic that no existing authorized capability at Weston was positioned to collect. The gap was significant. The opportunity to address it was time-limited. The collection window had characteristics that would not persist indefinitely. He had looked for an authorization pathway and had not found one that was fast enough. The role that would have given clear authority for this category of collection had been vacant at the time. My predecessor had left the post, and I had not yet been promoted into it. He had made a decision. He had used existing resources, staff, equipment, a building that was listed as storage, and had established the capability himself. He had kept the footprint small. He had kept the product dissemination within normal channels, attributed to Weston without specificity about the collection method, which was standard practice, and which meant the products had been received and used by people who had no reason to ask where they were coming from. He had told Sergeant Poole and the 2 other analysts who staffed the facility that the capability was in the process of being formally authorized and that the process was ongoing. This had been optimistic at the time. It had become less true as the months had passed. It had not been corrected. He said, "I knew you were coming. I have known since May that you had requested this inspection. I thought about putting Building 7 on the schedule. I decided to let the tour speak for itself first and see whether you raised it." I said, "You thought I might not raise it." He said, "I thought you might review everything else and form a view of the overall capability of the base before deciding how to approach Building 7. I thought that context might matter." He said it precisely. He was not making excuses. He was describing his calculation. I said, "The context does matter. That's not the problem." He said, "I know what the problem is." He said it quietly, as a statement of fact, not a concession. What the problem was. The problem was not that Building 7 existed. The problem was not that the intelligence it had produced was good. It was very good. It had been valuable for 6 months. It had filled a genuine gap, and it had done so effectively. The problem was the 8 months.
8 months of a capability running without formal authorization, in an environment where the person who could have authorized it had been in post for 5 of those 8 months and had not been told. 8 months of intelligence products entering the dissemination chain attributed to Weston without disclosure of the collection method. 8 months of Sergeant Poole and her colleagues working within an arrangement they had been told was being formalized and that had not been formalized. The problem was what 8 months of that did to the people inside it. Poole had been professional and composed when I entered Building 7. She was good at her job, clearly, demonstrably good. She had run the facility with the rigor and precision of someone who took the work seriously. And she had been working in an arrangement that was not what she had been told it was, for 8 months with no clear resolution in sight. That was the thing I sat with most. Not Lang's decision. Lang was an experienced officer who had made a calculated call under operational pressure and had continued to manage the consequences of it without quite finding the moment to resolve them.
I understood that calculation. I did not agree with all of it, but I understood it. What I sat with was Poole. 3 analysts in a building that should not have existed, doing work that genuinely mattered, told it was being authorized, waiting 8 months for a process that had not progressed because their commanding officer had not known how to progress it without disclosing what he had done.
What I did. I did not shut Building 7 down. I did not report Lang through the formal complaints mechanism. I did both of those things and neither of those things. I took 2 actions that made both of the obvious responses unnecessary. First, I formally authorized the capability, retrospectively, from the point at which I had assumed the post that gave me that authority 5 months ago. The authorization was not backdated to January. I did not have the authority to authorize it before I held the post. But from the point at which I did hold the post, the capability was now formally sanctioned. The 8 months became 5 months of informal operation, followed by 5 months of retroactive formal authorization. This was within my authority. It was not a clean solution. It was the most accurate solution available. Second, I submitted a formal record of the inspection findings that noted the capability, its establishment timeline, the authorization gap at the time of establishment, Lang's decision without characterizing his conduct beyond what the facts required. I noted that the intelligence value of the capability had been significant and that its products had been disseminated within standard protocols. I submitted this formally. Lang would face a review process. The record would be examined. The findings would be assessed. His career would carry a notation. Whether that notation would be positive or negative depended on people above both of us and on a process that was not mine to control. What was mine to control was the accuracy and completeness of what I submitted. I submitted the accurate and complete account.
Sergeant Liz Poole. I went back to Building 7 before I left Weston. I went alone. Lang did not come with me. Poole was at her workstation. She stood when I entered. I told her to sit. I told her that the capability had been formally authorized and that the work she and her colleagues had been doing was valued and would continue. I told her that the period of informal operation was a matter that would be reviewed at a level above Weston, and that the review would look at the decision made by command rather than the conduct of the analysts. I told her the work she had been producing was genuinely excellent. She said, "Thank you." She said it without elaboration, the particular economy of someone who has been holding a lot and is choosing not to unpack it in front of a colonel. I said, "You should have been told the true status of the arrangement much earlier. That's a separate matter, and it's being noted." She looked at me for a moment. Then she said, "We believed it was in the process of being authorized. That was enough to keep working." She said it without bitterness, as a statement of how she had managed it. I said, "That took a particular kind of trust." She said, "It's what you do." She went back to her workstation. I left Building 7. The drive back. Captain Burrell drove. I sat in the passenger seat and looked at the landscape and thought about the inspection and what I was going to put in the report and what I had already decided I was going to put in the report. I thought about Lang. He had built something that worked. He had done it without the authority to do it, in the judgment that the authority would have been granted if sought, and that the delay in seeking it would have cost the operational window. He had been right about the operational value. He had been wrong about the process. He had managed the consequences of that choice for 8 months, with a combination of careful silence and continued excellent work, hoping that the work would be its own justification when the moment of reckoning came. The work had been its own justification. That was the complicated part. I had stood in Building 7 and had seen something that I would have authorized if asked, that had been producing intelligence I valued, that had been staffed by people who were good at what they did,
and I had also understood that the process exists for reasons, that authorization processes are not bureaucratic inconvenience, but the mechanism by which people like Lang are held accountable to people like me, and by which people like me are held accountable to people above us. The process is the safety rail. When you build around it, even when you build something good, you have removed a safety rail that was there for a reason. Lang had removed the safety rail. The structure held. The structure holding did not mean the safety rail should have been removed. I had thought about this for a long time before I submitted the report. I submitted the accurate and complete account.
What happened after? The review of Lang's conduct took 4 months. Its findings were what careful findings tend to be, acknowledging the operational context, acknowledging the intelligence value, noting the procedural breach, noting the 8 months of informal operation and the inadequate disclosure to the analysts about the status of the arrangement. Lang received a formal reprimand. It was placed on his record. He remained in post at Weston. The capability continued. Building 7 now appears on the official capability register. Sergeant Poole continues to manage it. The work continues to be excellent. The most recent product I reviewed from that facility was the kind of intelligence that makes you sit up and read it twice, the same quality that had started all of this.
Lang. I saw him 6 months after the inspection at a conference. We acknowledged each other. We spoke briefly about the capability, the formal authorization, the ongoing production, the expansion that was being considered. Professional, precise. The conversation of two people who respect each other's competence and have a complicated history that both of them understand clearly. At the end of the conversation, he said something that I have thought about since. He said, "I should have asked." Not, "I should have done it differently," or "I should have waited." He said, "I should have asked." Simple, direct. I said, "Yes, you should have." He said, "Would you have said yes?" I said, "Probably, after a proper review." He said, "That's what I thought." He said it without relief and without vindication, as a man who has made a calculation that was partly right and partly wrong, and has been living with the full picture of both for the better part of a year. I said, "The proper review would have taken time." He said, "I know. I decided the time wasn't available." I said, "I understand the decision. That's different from endorsing it." He said, "I know that too." We moved on to other conversations.
Here is what Building 7 and an inspection schedule that omitted one address taught me. The right thing and the authorized thing are not always the same thing. But what I want to say specifically, from standing in Building 7 on a September morning, is this. The process is not the enemy of good work. It is what makes good work sustainable. Lang built something excellent. He ran it well. The intelligence it produced was genuinely valuable, and the work was done with real professionalism. None of that is in dispute. But the process exists for Sergeant Poole as much as it exists for the institution. 8 months of waiting for a formalization that was not coming, 8 months of working on trust alone, is a cost that fell entirely on the people inside the building, while the commanding officer managed the situation above them. That is the thing I sat with most. Ask. It is almost always possible to ask, and sometimes the person you ask will say yes. Drop a comment and tell me your story. I read every single one. And subscribe. I am here every week with a new story. She found the building they had not shown her. She understood what had been built inside it. She made sure it was allowed to stand.